In today's video, we're going to be diving deep into these big upcoming storms that are on the way for the United States, basically moving through the entire nation from west to east. So almost everybody will be impacted by these. And we do have a rather high risk of severe weather coming in at a moderate risk, which it sounds misleading, but moderate risk is actually the second highest, so it is very, very high. Medium to me has always felt like, or moderate better yet, has always felt like it should be the middle level, but it's really not. So kind of strange. Enhanced is maybe a better verbiage for the second highest ranking, and moderate should be a little bit lower. I don't really know. I don't really like the way the names work. I think that's why a lot of people do level 1, 2, 3, etc. risk. I think that's a little bit better to display to the general public, but regardless, we will move on with that information. I guess you guys can easily understand despite the confusion. We do have snowfall for multiple states as well that we'll be going over. So let's just dive into things. And let's take a look at tomorrow afternoon. And this is actually the day where we have that moderate risk down here for the deeper south. We will take a look at the Storm Prediction Center forecast at the end of this video so we can indicate exactly where those risk levels are at. So stay tuned for that. But bad thunderstorms across the south central states like Oklahoma, Texas, even into the deeper south like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee. And then surrounding areas have a chance of thunderstorms throughout the day tomorrow as well. We even have some isolated and scattered thunderstorm and shower activity happening as far northward as the Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast, so keep that in mind as well. Let's take a look at Thursday, and this is really when this thing is going to be moving towards the East Coast, and we do have chances of severe weather up and down the East Coast here, kind of circling back towards the Ohio Valley. Again, we will take a look at the Storm Prediction Center forecast for every single day upcoming, so keep that in mind. But really, if you're to the south or east of this low, so we're looking at areas even as far northward as Canada and as far southward as Florida, Georgia, South Carolina here. If you are to the south or east of this low, you are looking at a pretty good chance of thunderstorms at least, and a lot of areas in here, some chance of severe weather. We could tell that the cold air is diving southward, kind of on a southeast trajectory underneath this low, and we have warm air kind of circling around it to the north here, and this creates an intense swirl around this low pressure system, and also a lot of interaction between the cold and dry air and then that warm and humid air, and this is really the heart of a lot of our severe weather events around the nation. What's really encouraging this cold air to take such a deep dive behind that low is this warm air mass that is set up for the west. And this is actually going to be coming to an end on this model run. So we'll watch that take place. But your jet stream is ridging for the west, troughing for the east, or for the central states better yet, and then we have another ridge here for the east. But everything's going to move eastward, and we should see a full-blown kind of cool down here in the east here by Friday, as you can see, where the jet stream is ridging now for the west and into the central states, with more of a trough here across a lot of the east. So for the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and some of the Mid-Atlantic, expect colder conditions for the day on Friday, even some snowfall here for portions of Canada, as we have a 981 millibar low pressure center over the Great Lakes here. And trust me, that is a very, very strong low in the lower 980s, is certainly a concerning strength for this major storm, and this is causing a lot of rainfall and still some thunderstorm activity throughout areas impacted by this low pressure system. By Saturday on April 13th, we have some low pressure impacting the southwest, even bringing some Sierra Nevada snowfall there, rainfall for surrounding areas, and this ridge is beginning to expand eastward. A lot of times we see this storminess move on towards the west, and then cold air begins to build in with it, and this is what causes the warm air to have to move to the east. These colder and warmer air masses, or oftentimes lower and higher pressure air masses, move around like oil and water, avoiding each other. So that's why when this cold air is moving into the west, this warm air and drier air wants to rush away from it. It's running away from each other, again, like oil and water. I think that's a perfect analogy. For Sunday afternoon on April 14th, we see a relatively warm pattern throughout the nation. Nothing major as far as cold weather, but there is lower pressure and there is cooler weather compared to the eastern counterparts here. So we have warm air moving northward for the central and the eastern states now by this point. So expect nicer conditions to begin next week. Starting on Sunday, and even for Monday here, we see the same thing happening, but more stormy and cold weather for the west, as we have 1,001 here over Canada, 993 in Nebraska. This likely to be featuring some severe weather. And overall, a lot of that storminess and cold weather is in the west. A good week to be outdoors in the east, though. Starting out again Sunday and Monday, going to be very, very nice. By Tuesday, this 982 millibar low pressure center. So again, we're calling these storms major because they are. The lower 980s is extremely strong any time of year. But this springtime, very similar to fall time, I feel like typically is quieter as far as these lows are concerned. So this is especially strong for this time of year. Typically the winter time is when we see these very strong lows. But this seems to be a little late in the season for this low of pressure. We can tell there is a cold front trying to form, so potential severe weather along that southern area to the south of the low is certainly a factor. And then heavy rainfall, kind of flat horizontally here is featured for the north central states into the upper Midwest and Great Lakes, as well as some of the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic as well. So expect some flooding and heavy rainfall overall to potentially occur. Now, these low pressure systems are along the boundary in the jet stream, so we have severe cold air out west. Really, I can't understate that. And then we have warm air, really warm and humid air rushing in for the east in general here, especially the closer you are to the coast by this frame. And this really allows for isolated and scattered thunderstorms to start to become a factor. I talked about this a couple of days ago, but as we reach into May, June, July, those are the types of days where there's always a 20, 30 to 40% chance of thunderstorm activity every single day. And usually when you're looking at the models, this is what those types of days look like. You just have these isolated and scattered thunderstorms kind of everywhere because the temperatures and humidity are so convective of that type of activity. So that is going to become a lot more common, but this is the first day that I'm seeing this activity really pick up. Next Wednesday, April 17th. And again, we have really brutal cold air in the west, even some snowfall for kind of Canada here in the plains, and also the plains in the United States, just to the east of the Rocky Mountains there in Montana and North Dakota. By Thursday, what we see is a 996 up there in Canada, again bringing plenty of snowfall and rainfall respectively, depending on where you're at up there in Canada. And it does have this kind of dragging, far-stretching cold front, and again, this could feature some severe weather and thunderstorms with it. Scattered about, but there is some areas of higher organization, I would say. Areas like in here, and also in here, like Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and then states like Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi there. As we keep going, we do get to the next morning for Friday morning. 991 here over Canada. We have 1005 further east in Canada. And then again, we have this kind of dragging frontal boundary here. A little bit stationary by this point where it's kind of staying still, but some heavier thunderstorm activity along that. So yes, the worst of the severe weather is this week, it appears, versus next week. But I would say the more consistent thunderstorm activity day after day after day is going to be next week. So today is very spring-like, or better yet, this week is very spring-like. Next week seems more moving towards summer-like conditions, but expect us to kind of tackle and move back and forth between these two types of patterns throughout the rest of the month of April and into a lot of May. That can be expected. Very, very common stuff here. GFS model. We see storm number one, probably the most major and most impactful storm of the entire model run, but we do get this kind of second storm, and this model says this one's going to be very strong for next Tuesday. 977 over South Dakota, which is ridiculously strong, and potentially severe weather across Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota here, even South Dakota as well near that low, Missouri, Arkansas, and eventually into Louisiana as well. Lots of snowfall back to the west of it for the Rockies and even some lower elevation areas near those Rocky Mountains because we have so much cold air over this northwest corner. That becomes possible, and very heavy, very persistent rainfall as you get very close to that low. After that one kind of moves out, look at how major that snowstorm is compared to what we saw in the European model. We're seeing a northern plains monster snowstorm here for Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, and North Dakota, and then throughout portions of Canada as well there. Thunderstorm activity continues for the areas to the east of that low, and that is really a common theme. Now on this model, we do get beyond hours 240, so here is that same frame we took a look at on the European model, Afterwards, we actually build into another pretty major storm down into the lower 990s, which is still very, very strong for this time of year. And by Monday morning, or very early on Monday morning, this will likely be 1 or 2 p.m. or 2 a.m. there on Monday, April 22nd. We see a very strong cold front with intense thunderstorms, likely another severe weather event if it pans out this way, with some chance for snowfall in the northern plains and upper Midwest here. So we actually get 3 very major storms on this model. And that low at its peak drops all the way down to a 987, which is still on its own very, very strong. And we actually do get a little bit of a cold blast. It's not too intense, but in the east, you can expect cooler conditions around this time frame. But likely we're talking 5 to 10 degrees below normal, which isn't really, really, really significant in the grand scheme of things. If you average 75 degrees, you might be at about 70. So this would be relatively unnoticeable without looking at graphics or observation. So if you were to just walk outside, you're not going to be like, oh, it's below average temperatures out here today. I don't think this is that type of cool down, at least not yet. This is very far out, so it could look more intense, it could look less intense, it could just not happen. But what we're looking at here, if hypothetically it was to come completely true just like this, that would not be that dramatic of a cool down for the eastern states like we're used to earlier in the season, like March and February. Total precipitation on the European model, the east is still where all of the activity is centered. I would say the exclusion here would be for the southeast coast, where these models are consistently calling for a little bit less precipitation for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, into Virginia, Delmarva, and southern New Jersey there. These areas, a lot of the storms aren't moving straight offshore. They seem to be kind of moving straight up into Canada a lot of times, so you just never get the most major impacts down here. It's just too far from that low. So it looks a little bit more close to normal as far as how much precipitation we see over the next 10 days, whereas these red areas is pretty far above normal as far as precipitation is concerned. So if you're a little bit further inland, expect a little bit worse conditions than along the coast. Now, for the total snowfall, no surprise, there's very minimal amounts anywhere east of the Rockies. We do see a couple of these mountain ranges seeing some snowfall, especially the Adirondacks there in areas near the Finger Lakes of New York. A little bit for the White Mountains into Maine, but very, very minimal. It's mostly going to be your Cascades, Sierra Nevada, and Rockies. Now, your temperature pattern, we get this brief cool down here coming up for the day on Thursday into Friday, maybe even lingering into a bit of Saturday for the coast. But as we reach the high temperatures on Sunday, we are fully engulfed in a far above average temperature pattern, especially along the plains and the Midwest, where we could see temperatures 15 to 25 degrees above normal. So very, very noticeable. This is the opposite of what we were talking about with that cool down. This is the type of pattern where you're going to walk outside the door and be like, man, it is hot today compared to what it normally is. This will be a noticeable difference. Same story with this cool down for the Southwest. This is considerable and noticeable when you walk outside. And really, I mean, I would break it down, but all the way through Friday the 19th, we still have warm temperatures, not quite as warm, but still above normal for the east, and we still have below normal temperatures in the west. So we look to move into this warm in the east, cold in the west pattern, and really just stay in it all the way through at least the 19th. That seems to be the trend here to me. So we're finally kind of slowing down and locking into something, at least for a little while. Now, as promised, the Storm Prediction Center outlooks for today, we have general thunderstorm risks for some of the Rocky states and plains, also through a lot of the south central and some of the interior eastern states here, where we have a general thunderstorm risk in those lighter green areas. That's where we expect thunderstorms to be possible, but we're not expecting severe weather in terms of wind, tornadoes, or hail. Although anything is possible, and you should always pay attention, especially if there is a bad thunderstorm that you see on radar. This is an area where we don't expect anything too terrible. The darker green is where we expect isolated severe weather reports to occur. The yellow in there is your level 2 slight risk, and that's where we expect to see scattered about thunderstorms that are very severe oftentimes, and will bring a couple of those severe weather reports with them. And then again, this level 3 enhanced risk in the orange for areas of Texas and Louisiana. That is where we expect widespread, semi-widespread severe weather to occur. I would say you usually don't expect from west to east to see the entire area seeing severe thunderstorms. However, you do expect to see much of that area seeing really, really intense thunderstorms and those severe weather reports. Day 2 is going to be a little bit better to break down all the risk levels because we do have that moderate risk, which again is pretty misleading. We have this general thunderstorm risk for the Dakotas, Minnesota, and a bit of Wisconsin, where again, no severe weather is expected, but still prepare for anything. Same story with the surrounding light green areas. The darker green is where we expect isolated severe weather. Yellow, that slight risk, is the scattered. The orange, enhanced for Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and a bit of the Florida panhandle there. We expect a little bit more widespread severe weather. And then this moderate risk, which is really the second highest risk possible, and it is even higher than that, even makes it sound like, because very, very rarely do they issue high-risk severe weather days. You might see 1 or 2 high-risk days a year. In extremely active years, you might see a few more than that. But there's a lot of years where we see 0 high-risk days as well. So that is really only reserved for the highest end severe weather outbreaks. The moderate risk is the one that you see a few times a year. I would say likely between 5 and 10 oftentimes you see these. And this is something that they use for really, really impactful severe weather days. And if it verifies, you can expect to see really intense severe thunderstorms throughout almost the entire red area. So yes, moderate is very misleading. And, you have 5 levels of severe weather, but you have that general thunderstorm risk. I would argue that moderate should maybe even be where slight is. I think it's not about the risk level. That's not the problem. It's the names. They just don't really make sense to me. Marginal, slight, I think work, and then maybe moderate, and then having moderate downgraded to level 3 perhaps, and then making enhanced level 4, and then 5 being the high risk, I think would even make more sense. But you might need to reword enhanced into something a little bit more intense than that even, because I think that the moderate level 4 just really makes people think that, oh, it's just a medium risk, it's just a kind of mid-level risk. But I really, really feel like that understates these events. Again, I'm kind of nitpicking, and as long as there's people like me that can break it down for folks, I don't think it's too bad of a problem. But that just seems like such a easy fix to reword these things to really make people aware. Every single year we talk about how people go unwarned, they're not aware of these severe weather events, and they get hit by things that they don't expect. If we were to reword these into words that really explain the types of conditions that we can see, I think that we would get a lot better awareness. And you would rather have awareness than, people just kind of downplaying these things, especially when it comes to severe weather where life-threatening impacts are expected. Oftentimes in moderate risk areas, you usually expect to see large tornadoes being possible. So yeah, really understates things. Anyway, there's my rant for the day. Level 3. Day 3 outlook here, which will be for Thursday, April 11th. We have that general thunderstorm risk again in the light green. The darker green taking up a lot of the eastern states here, especially the southeast, mid-Atlantic, and portions of the Ohio Valley. That's where we expect those isolated severe weather reports. And then we have 2 areas of slight risk level 2. Some for Kentucky and Ohio, as well as a bit of West Virginia and Pennsylvania here. Maybe even like half a county in southeastern Indiana. And then for areas in the armpit of Florida, which is what I always call it, not to be degrading. I love Florida, but that just reminds me of the armpit of Africa, which is, it looks like an armpit. Georgia, especially the southeastern corner there. Most of South Carolina, and then a lot of southern and southeastern North Carolina there. Also in that level 2 slight risk of severe weather. I want to say one more thing. I know this is annoying that I keep talking about this, but for some reason it's on my mind today. We had a slight risk here in Virginia last year in April, and we actually had an EF3 tornado hit in Virginia Beach, Virginia, which is almost unheard of, or maybe even that's never happened before. But a lot of people underestimate these types of days. They're like, oh, this is just every day, but it's still just such an uncovered science. There's still so much to learn, and I do expect a lot of advancements over the next 10 to 20 years. However, these things are just so often underestimated, and I just feel like rewording a lot of this would help so much. Anyway, we have one more thing to look at here. There is a day 7 long-range severe weather outlook from the Storm Prediction Center, where we do expect at least a slight risk for portions of Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. So starting Monday on the 15th could be our next round of severe weather starting up. Obviously, there's going to be some risks in between these two major events, but as far as these major events, this could be the beginning of the next one, and oftentimes we see this and it actually ends up getting upgraded to an enhanced or even more in there. For instance, your moderate risk that we have for tomorrow on Wednesday started out as one of these yellow areas, 15% chance of severe weather, which roughly translates, or not even roughly, it's actually it directly translates to a slight risk, level 2 of severe weather. But again, oftentimes they end up upgrading these over time. So keep that in mind as well for Monday on the 15th. Also, they don't have a day 8 outlook, but I would anticipate that likely we will begin to see some severe weather move east of here for the days following. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Again, sorry about my ranting, but I do feel like that's a relatively important discussion to bring up and something that I think the community should be talking about a bit, and it's something that I've thought about for years now. I don't think I've ever discussed it on the channel, but anyway, forgive me. It's not normally like this, I swear. So be sure to subscribe as we do upload videos, not quite like this one, but usually a little bit more to the point, about the weather every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.